Hi, my name is Tyler Herberger, and I did my project on Vincent van Gogh. Here's some history of Vincent van Gogh's life. Vincent van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853, in Zundert, Netherlands. His father was an Austrian country minister named Theodorus van Gogh, and his mother was Anna Cornelia Carbentus, who was an artist who loved to draw nature pieces and loved to use watercolors in her works. Vincent van Gogh was the second eldest and had three younger sisters, Anna Elizabeth, and Wilhelmine, and as well as two younger brothers, Theo and Cor. Van Gogh attended school until the age of 15 when he was forced to leave and get a job to help support his family. Van Gogh was given a job by his uncle Cornelius at his art dealership called Goupil and C. In 1873, Van Gogh was transferred from his uncle's art dealership to the Goupil Gallery in London. This is where he first-handedly experienced English culture and began to fall in love with it. During his time in London, he fell in love with the woman Eugene Loyer. Van Gogh adored this woman so much he asked her to marry him, in which she rejected. And this is when Van Gogh's life took a downward spiral. He began to develop a hatred for art, and he told people that walked into his store that art was worthless. During his depression from the marriage denial, he began to read the Bible and spun his whole life around and devoted it to God. He began to teach in the Methodist boys' school in hope of one day becoming a minister. He began to study for the entrance exam for the School of Theology in Amsterdam, and so he can become a minister. So he studied for a whole year, but they told him he had to take the exam in the Latin language, and he denied. He didn't want to, so this was his denied entrance. This is why he was denied entrance. In 1880, Van Gogh moved to Brussels with his brother Leo in search to become an artist. Theo supported Van Gogh financially at this time, and he began to take art lessons on his own. Van Gogh did. So he began studying books by Jean-François Millet and Charles Barguet. And in 1855, this is when he started working on his piece, Potato Eaters. His brother was not very fond of Van Gogh's piece and believed it would not be anything, um, because it was before his Impressionist influence. So it was very dark. In 1886, Van Gogh moved to Paris with his brother, and this is when he discovered his first taste of Impressionism. In 1888, Van Gogh was very poor and was living off coffee, bread, and absinthe. Absolutely, I don't, and he was living off these things, which began to make him very ill physically as well as mentally. And during this time, this is when he cut off his ear with a razor blade and gave it to a woman as a gift. And he even chased his friend, his roommate, Gauguin, around with a knife. So after these two incidents, Van Gogh was forced to move to St. Paul de Massol Asylum in St. Remy de Provence because people signed a petition saying he was dangerous. He began to paint in the hospital gardens, and eventually in 1889 he was invited to present those paintings in Brussels, in which he sent his paintings Arises and Starry Night. Van Gogh has one boy named after him, so it's a junior, and he was born January 31st, 1890. And later this year is when Van Gogh committed suicide by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Some events that happened at the time that he was alive and was working were Louis Napoleon became Emperor Napoleon III of the French. The American Civil War began, which was 1861, and the Triple Alliance was formed, which included Germany, Austria, and Italy, as well as the telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell. Some art movements happening at the time of his work were, um, of course, Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Neo-Impressionism, Realism and Symbolism. So Impressionism was the biggest influence on Van Gogh once he moved to Paris in 1886. Impressionism was a style of painting in which short brushstrokes of bright colors in were to represent the effect of lights on objects. Post-Impressionism emerged in reaction to Impressionism in the 1880s, and Post-Impressionism encompasses Symbolism and Neo-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism turned away from the effects of lights and atmosphere and used more color theory and personal feeling. Neo-Impressionism brought a quasi-scientific approach to the Impressionists' interest in light and color and different approaches with the brushstrokes. It brought dots and dashes of color together to form an image. Realism was also there, and it revolted against the exotic subject matter and the exaggerated emotionalism and drama of the Romantic movement during this time. Symbolism was the last one, and it's a Gothic component of Romanticism and Impressionism. His theories of art were Vince Van Gogh's were post-impressionism and neo-impressionism. Post-impressionism, of course, is what I said earlier, which was it encompasses symbolism and neo-impressionism, and it turned away from the effects of lights and atmospheres and used more color theory and personal feeling. And neo-impressionism was also his theory was one theory he was part of, and this was it brought the quasi-scientific approach to the Impressionist interest in light and color and different approaches with the brushstroke, so it brought the dots and dashes of color together to form an image. So there was art movements he belonged to, and just as the ones before, he was to post-impressionism, neo-impressionism, and impressionism. And so here's some summary of his work, the most important ones. So the Potato Eaters, he did in April of 1885, and this is one of Van Gogh's famous early works. This is before he was influenced by Impressionism in Paris, before the influence. He chose very dark, shadowy, monotone colors, and many of his people looked quite crazy, as you can see. And the main subject matter of all of them was the anatomy of peasants and the hardworking, simple peasant life. As you can see, it's very dark and sad, as you can see that they're poor. Then, of August of 88, this is another popular one. It's called The Vase with 15 Sunflowers. This is a painting after he moved to France and was heavily influenced by Impressionism. He began to use very bright colors and paint in heavy layers and broader strokes. This picture was a start to a more positive outlook in his paintings, and the reason this one was specifically painted was because he painted it for his roommate Paul Gauguin. Then we have the Cafe Terrace at Night. So as you can see, this painting was obviously after the Impressionism thing, the Impressionism influence, and you can see the wavy, bending lines and his own little feel of it. He loved the nighttime, and one thing he said is, "I often think that the night is more alive and more richly colored than the day." This here is the Starry Night, and this is June of 1889, and this is his most famous painting. This is what I think of when I see Van Gogh after his Impression influence, the wavy lines indicating movement through the night as the wind was blowing and the sky is moving. His strokes are shorter and not as long and drawn out before. He used many cool colors of the night that bring a calmness and balance, and he used yellow to emphasize things he wanted to stick out, such as the stars. All the colors and movement and the lines together give that unity. And I think, well, I know Van Gogh did not invent the Impressionism, but he did do the most groundbreaking work in it. Van Gogh is known for his Impressionist style from Paris in 1886, and in art, when Impressionism is talked about, Van Gogh is shown first. So he was not the founder, but definitely now when you think of Impressionism, when people look back on it, they think exactly of Van Gogh as he was not the founder, but he is the main person shown when talked about this. He used like about all the main elements of art. I mean, he tended to use shape, line, volume, space, motion, color, repetition, unity, proportion, contrast, and balance. They were all used very, very well after Impressionism. He made very many geometric shapes, but they were not abstract. Many of his paintings had a sense of motion and fluidity. He had a linear perspective with an overlapping of the objects. He emphasized on a more fluid motion, began to paint images in his own way, not so straightforward as he did in the past. It was an exact replica. He used brighter, more positive colors and had balance between them. Impressionism made him begin to use shorter brushstrokes, more of a wavy, free-flowing look. He would put more emphasis on objects he wanted to stick out, and he wanted to guide your eyes to the most important part of his painting. The influence of Impressionism is what really put everything together and made him a more complete artist. of art Vincent van Gogh employs would be two, and that'd be art for delight and art for self-expression, because his works were not religious and he was not there to putting works in remembrance of people. He had many self-portraits and portraits of towns, so I would say this is art for delight because he drew the towns for sake of its beauty, and I would say the self-expression would be in his portraits. The art criticism I found on him would be from Albert Auer, in which he said that Van Gogh perceived the coloration of things with such intensity, with such a metallic, gem-like quality. His work as intense and feverish, his brushstrokes as fiery, very powerful, his palette as dazzling, and his technique matched his artistic temperament, vigorous and intense. And I feel during Van Gogh's lifetime, he was criticized often for being crazy and unstable. So this led him to only sell one painting throughout his life. And I agree with him being crazy and unstable because ultimately he was. I can say the theories of art criticism that can be applied would be formal and expressive theories, because he began to blossom when when he was influenced by the Impressionists. So that was the formal, and the expressive would be when he would take his own approach to his painting and make it his own style, the Impressionist style, and he would express his thoughts of beauty in his own way. So in conclusion, Vincent van Gogh is a very talented artist with a lot of pieces. He made many great works of art to show the world. Even though some of his neighbors may have felt he was crazy, he was able to get inspiration from many different scenes and objects. Van Gogh was able to leave behind him many different types of art and many different artworks that can be enjoyed by everyone. Although Van Gogh is practically a self-taught artist, he did very well with what he discovered for himself. He was able to believe in himself and grow to his ability. Yes, Van Gogh needed financial help from his brother, but that's fine. That's just showing a loving relationship and support from his brother. And I believe that today, I believe that people remember him today because his work is so natural and is easy to relate to, and the artwork has a sense of real world that people have lived in or wish to live in now. Anytime someone can relate to something, they obviously are able to remember it more. And Vincent van Gogh is an outstanding artist, and his work will be in memory for a very long time to come.